Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of AKP Sports Talk. As always, I'm Ari here with Korea. As we've been saying for the last week or two, a lot of exciting things coming up, in the sports world across a number of different sports. Today we'll be focusing on NFL free agency, and then Friday will be, all college basketball ahead of the selection Sunday. But with free agency starting up in NFL next week, that's going to be our focus today. How are you doing today, Korea?
Good. I mean, as you mentioned, there's so much going on. I mean, we had the beginning of the WBC last night with the Cuban air horn and Cuba getting their first Cuba losing their first game against the Netherlands, and then early this morning, Chinese Taipei had the loss to Panama. But we have the WBC that just kicked off, and that's fun to see. We also have, I mean, it's all right. It's 10 a.m. my time, and there's college basketball on. So there's that as well. You mentioned we had franchise tag deadline yesterday, and all of that. We're going to get into looking at some of the best free agents about a week ahead before the opening of NFL free agency, and just so much going on. And as I already said, on Friday it's just going to be all college basketball for you guys as we get ready for Selection Sunday, and one of the best weeks next week in terms of basketball with the March Madness first rounds and the first four and bracket selections. But today we're going to be focusing on football, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see where some of these top free agents could go in this offseason.
Yeah, so let's start. We'll start off with some of the news from the last couple of days. We'll start off with the Geno Smith extension, and interestingly enough, today is the 1 year anniversary of the Russell Wilson trade. 1 year ago today, that trade went down, and almost 1 year, 363 days later, we hear the news on Monday that Geno Smith gets a 3-year extension. And of course, when the numbers first came out, everyone was going crazy over the 3 years, $105 million, $35 million per year. Everyone was talking about how that was too much, blah, 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 blah. And then one day later, we get more information, but you knew there's always more info to contracts and what is first reported of those numbers in terms of the specific details. And it was reported yesterday on Tuesday that a lot of it is incentive based. The base salary of it is 3 years, $75 million, so $25 million per year, which puts him like in the middle of the pack basically among quarterbacks contracts. And so it's 3 years, $75 million in terms of the base salary. He's earning $28 million in the first year, and with $30 million in incentives in the first year. And then, if he keeps up the play that he had last year, then he earns, a lot more. And the Seahawks have a pretty easy out after 2 years if they want out of the contract. So they're not necessarily tied into him 3 years. It's more like a 2-year deal with a third year that's kind of more optional. If he is playing well this next couple of years. Korea, when you kind of first heard the news, what was your kind of thoughts on it? And then, after we heard the news yesterday of the more information, did your mind kind of change from when you first heard about the deal?
Oh yeah, definitely. When you're first reading at first glance, you don't get that many details. And when it first came out, I was like, oh, that's a little bit of an overpay considering, yes, Geno did have a great story. He led the league in completion percentage. He looked like a pretty good pocket passer. In this day and age, obviously the market for QBs gets a lot more higher as the years go on. That's just kind of how market value works in sports. But I mean, 35 a year. And then obviously the news came out of how the structured contract actually looked, and it made me calm down a little bit. Obviously, excited to see how much. With a little bit of an edge to play for now. Obviously, he gets more money and incentives. Maybe he's playing with a little bit of edge to try and get those incentives, which means, he may have, one of those amazing seasons again. But, at the same time, this could backfire. And, that's kind of the risk you do take with the quarterback who had a comeback year, but, has never really proved to be anything more than great except for one season in the NFL. But at the same time, even though this was him at full, I feel like there was just so much competition like a year ago when the Seahawks, obviously, as you mentioned, a year ago today, when we did trade away Russell Wilson, a lot of people a year ago today, everyone was assuming that Drew Lock was going to be the quarterback. And this time now we would be taking a quarterback at the 5 pick. But that has completely changed to, okay, we have a quarterback for the next 3 years. Maybe drafting a quarterback in the first round is not the smartest idea, even though apparently the Seahawks are still linked to it, which honestly I feel is ridiculous because I feel like that would be a waste of potential, talent on the defensive line, guys like Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, Tyree Wilson, all those guys, Miles Murphy, all of those names that have been linked to being top 10 picks from the defensive line position, or the defensive front. But I mean, I'm happy for Geno. Obviously, he deserves the base contract that he is getting. He proved it last year, and he proved to be. I mean, honestly, you can say that he is arguably a top 10 quarterback, maybe in terms of in the pocket. He's definitely a great pocket passer, and his running ability is limited, but he can throw on the run too. We've seen his crossbody throw, that one throw against the Saints where he was going to his left, and I think he found Tyler deep, and he was crossing his body. It was like just an amazing throw. But in terms of what I expected the Seahawks to bring Geno back. A lot of people were saying after the season, like, well, what do you do? Because obviously it was a 1-year deal for Geno. There was no really hype. And, now I feel like this could be the start of something big, especially with, the fact that the offense is still pretty much going to remain the same. Obviously, DK is still going to be here for a little while. Tyler Lockett's still going to be here for a while. They have a rookie running back who should have been rookie of the year at running back position, but he's still going to be there. An offensive line that's young, but it will be improving. I feel like that's kind of what you want with a situational quarterback like Geno, who is in the pocket, can get you downfield. You still have Shane Waldron calling the plays, and I feel like that's why Geno Smith has taken such a resurgence as well, is because of the fact that surrounding him is better considerably from where he's been with the Jets, the Giants, and the Chargers. Surrounding him is better, one. And two, you have a play caller who fits what his play style is. Because Jared Goff, who's now in Detroit, when he was in LA with Shane Waldron for that 1 year, he wasn't horrible. I mean, they beat Shane Waldron's offense beat Seattle in the first round of the playoffs that year. People forget that, right? And so that's why I say, Geno deserves this money, and I'm really happy for him. He had an impressive year. He still is not writing back, but he's writing his name on the contract line for that big extension. I'll tell you that much. But good for him. I feel like at first glance you could say that. When I saw first glance, I saw 3 years, 105, and I was like, oh, it's a little bit of an overpay. But as you saw the constructed down contract, it really was like, okay, well, he has a lot to play for in terms of incentives throughout the season. So maybe he'll reach those again. But, definitely deserved the money. He's not going anywhere. Seattle does not have to worry about the quarterback position, in my opinion, for the next 2 years. Obviously, behind Geno Smith, they have Drew Lock. And, Drew Lock is not great, but at the same time, I feel like he's a solidified better backup than most backups in the league right now, just because of the fact that he knows how to play the game. He just has some bad interceptions, obviously, but that's another asset as well. And then say Seattle does take a quarterback, maybe later in the draft, just to see what's going, instead of wasting a first rounder on some top talent. They can still bring him up, develop him, and he could be the next Brock Purdy story in Seattle if Geno goes down or something like that. So I feel like the Seattle addressed the quarterback position, which is one of the number one things to do this offseason. And now the focus shifts to helping that defensive front and maybe some cornerback help as well.
Yeah, so, that's a good point from last offseason where, when they made the Wilson trade, most assumed that Drew Lock would get the first kind of shot to start just because most would think that, he has, even though he has more upside, even though he hasn't shown anything in Denver. But you kind of figured you knew what Geno was at that point, whereas Drew Lock at least had a higher ceiling, obviously a lower floor, but you kind of just want to take that chance. And so last offseason, it was a lot of kind of Drew Lock and Geno splitting the reps at training camp and all of that. And so now Geno Smith having all of that to himself should help him this offseason to get, even better. So Locke is a free agent, so we'll see if they bring him back or not. I kind of, for me, with that number 5 pick, it's kind of like I'm like 50-50 because it's like on one end, they're hopefully never going to have another, top 5, top 10 pick anytime soon. And so it's like you're not going to have another chance to get this type of quarterback like a Richardson or, someone like that at this spot. But on the other hand, like Geno wasn't the problem last year. It was obviously the defense. And so on the other hand, you're not going to have another chance of getting a defensive lineman of this caliber that you're going to get at number 5. I'm assuming Anderson's going to be off the board in the top 4. I'm assuming. And so you're probably looking at a Carter potentially best available, and then you have his off the field, small concerns with all of that. And then, like you said, you have a couple other guys that are kind of in the conversation that could be at 5, or they could trade down a couple spots and get another defensive lineman at like maybe 9, let's say, if they traded down with Carolina. So I'm kind of like 50-50 on, going quarterback, going defensive lineman, or trading down. And I think that they have a lot of options, obviously, and they're going to take it down to the day of the draft, I think, to make their final decision on what they're going to do. If they don't go quarterback, at number 5 or number 9, if they trade down or whatever, I'm kind of interested in Hendon Hooker potentially as like a guy to sit behind Geno Smith for a year or two. Obviously coming off his ACL tear, that would benefit him in that regard to begin with. Sitting behind Geno for at least a year. And then obviously he was a first-round prospect before the ACL tear, obviously, so the talent isn't an issue. It's just the injury. So that's one quarterback that I'd be interested in if they were to go that route of maybe going a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round type of quarterback. But yeah, I mean, the Seahawks have right now pick, it's 5 and 20, I believe. So a lot of options. And so it's going to be, interesting to see which route they go, because obviously they crushed the draft last year. And if they can do anything close to that this year, then that would put them in a great position, obviously. They're already in the great position moving forward, but an even better position moving forward if they can nail it again this year. So we'll see how that plays out. So that was the first bit of news. Then we had an even bigger extension. Daniel Jones with the Giants, 4 years, $160 million, so $40 million per year. It's $82 million over the first 2 years, so the majority is the first 2 years, and the first year cap of $19 million against the cap. So it's kind of similar where it's favorable for the Giants kind of early on in the deal, like it is, with the Seahawks, Geno Smith. So it's kind of similar in that regard. And then alongside that, they gave Saquon Barkley a non-exclusive franchise tag. So it's a guaranteed $10 million. And I think that they're still kind of talking about an extension with him potentially. And with the non-exclusive tag, teams can talk to Barkley about signing a deal, and the Giants can either match or give up, or the team gives up 2 first-round picks. And so, we'll talk about with Lamar with this, but with Saquon, you assume the team's not going to pay Saquon and give up 2 first-round picks. So, Barkley should obviously still be a Giant with this tag. So the Giants keep the quarterback and running back from last year's playoff run. And then now you assume they look to the draft or free agency for a wide receiver to help this offense. Obviously, they re-signed Isaiah Hodgins, but they're probably going to look for a star receiver in the draft or someone in free agency potentially. Korea, what was your thoughts on these 2 moves? It was kind of expected, but
yeah, it was expected, but I'm a little disappointed because personally, I've had my ups and downs with Daniel Jones throughout my past, whether it's been elite Danny Dimes that we see on the field or the one time where he threw 186 yards and 3 interceptions, and I started him in fantasy. I just don't know if he's worth that much money. Now, yes, you can credit the fact that, now Brian Dable, new head coach, new system, new offense, the fact that they're using Daniel Jones' legs because he has that speed, ability to break out in the open. But people forget that the Giants were also carried by the guy that they tagged, Saquon. Literally carried. The run game, without Saquon, I don't know if this Giants team would even be sniffing 500 without Saquon Barkley. So, yes, he got the tag. I feel like they're going to restructure it. They're going to find a deal for him. As you said, they're still working on it. I feel like if no deal is coming, then I feel like this may be the last of Saquon in New York. Honestly, if this keeps up, I feel like they're almost at a point where, yes, you paid the quarterback. You got to pay the running back soon enough because the running back is doing a lot more than the quarterback right now. And then, obviously, yes, they need to find a wide receiver. They may address that in the draft. They may find that in free agency. Who knows? But for this Giants team, I feel like, obviously, I don't think it was the right move, but it was kind of the main move that they wanted to focus on, keeping Daniel Jones. I feel like there are plenty of other quarterbacks that would be honestly better in terms of passing and running, Anthony Richardson, than Daniel Jones, honestly. I really don't think – I feel like this is a one and done. Daniel in comparison to Geno Smith, Geno Smith has never been in the right system. And you can credit the fact that Brian Dable has led this up, but I just don't believe Daniel Jones maintains that kind of level because now they know how he's going to run. He can get out in the open. And when he throws the ball, sometimes like against the Lions, he doesn't look good throwing the ball. Like he threw I think 2 or 3 interceptions that game. So I don't know which Daniel Jones we're going to get next season. I feel like that's a really big gamble. I definitely am not a fan of this extension, but the Giants really wanted to keep their quarterback. So I guess props to them to now not have to worry about quarterbacks because one of the bigger things was coming into last season was, is Daniel Jones going to be a quarterback being the New York Giants in 2023? And he proved that he can, but I just don't think he's worth $40 million. I just don't believe that. I can't fathom that. But obviously Saquon non-exclusive tag. No, he did, right? Non-exclusive tag, right? Yeah, I'm about to say non-exclusive tag. So it feels like they want to bring back Saquon, obviously. So they may bring back the duo, and then they'll try to find some way to get some more receiving help because obviously you mentioned Isaiah Hodgins, but after they let go the GOAT himself, Kenny Golladay, they have no one. And it's really sad. All right, I don't know if you saw this, but there was someone who made an early MVP bet for the 2023 NFL MVP, and it was Kenny Golladay. Plus it was a $2. It was just a $2 donation. I was like, that's a donation right there, because and then he got cut 2 weeks later. So they definitely need an elite receiver. Maybe it can be I don't know. I think they have the 20 something pick in the draft. I forget what pick they have in this upcoming draft. I think it's late this year. They have the number 26. So, it's going to be late first round. I don't know what receivers are going to be available. Maybe if Smith and Jigba falls, maybe they can snap him. But I don't think reaching on a guy like Addison is, what they're looking for. So, maybe they'll address that in free agency.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about, some of these contracts and how they look big right now is that, obviously the cap goes up every year. And so, a few years from now, this will look like it was nothing. When you look back and Kirk Cousins, when he signed that huge contract with Minnesota, everyone was talking about how big that was, a few years ago or whenever, 3, 4, 5, whenever that was, he handful of years back, and now you look back and like that's like nothing compared to what Carr and these guys are getting, this year. So obviously, with the cap going up every year, it's going to kind of change the outlook of how the contract looks, a few years from now. And um, I guess it's different because Geno Smith is like half of it or around there is like incentive based, whereas Jones is not quite to that extent in that regard. But um, yeah, I mean they made the playoffs, with basically no receivers, so to speak. And obviously they had a good foundation under Dable and, good team chemistry and all that. So it was obviously going to get done whether people agree with it or not. And so now they'll just look to address the receiving core, alongside Isaiah Hodgins and then address the defense a bit as well. And, we'll see if they can build off what they did last year, making the divisional round of the playoffs. So now we'll move on to the big name on the non-exclusive tag in Lamar Jackson. Obviously, all offseason, the Ravens and him were trying to come to an actual extension, and the two sides were pretty far apart according to reports. And so they placed the non-exclusive tag, which I think was $32 million, I think it was, something like that. And interestingly enough, like right away, it was the Dolphins, Falcons, Commanders, and maybe one or two other teams that said, "Oh, we're not interested," like right away. But those reports, or quote unquote reports, were from quote unquote sources, and no names given for the sources. So we don't know who told them that. And it's kind of interesting how, right away they say that they're not interested in terms, instead of like at least exploring an option or whatever. Like I said before, with this non-exclusive tag, the risk is that you not only have to give them the contract that Ravens aren't going to match, but you also have to give up 2 first-round picks, and so that's kind of the downfall, for lack of a better term, of signing, a quarterback to this deal. But obviously, Lamar is still a former MVP and all that, and then you have the injury concerns and all that. So there's kind of pros and cons to Lamar and what would be signing him to a deal where you have to also give up 2 first-round picks plus pay him big money. So, Curry, what's kind of your thoughts on how all this has gone down so far?
Yeah, I always kind of knew that Lamar and the Baltimore Ravens were going to be far apart. And, we saw, now it comes to a point where now he got the non-exclusive tag. And, you mentioned that like report, which I find interesting, that it was in the 4 teams were the Commanders, who just brought in Eric Bieniemy, the Raiders, who obviously Derek Carr is now gone, so they have an open spot. But then I heard that they may bring Jarrett Stidham back. The Falcons, which is a team that Lamar has been linked to almost all offseason, and then the Carolina Panthers, who I feel like they're in a full rebuild, but you never really hear who the sources are. It just says per league sources, so we don't know how true or false that real statement is nowadays. But yeah, I feel like Lamar and the Ravens have just always kind of been far apart, and and we all saw the kind of distanced. Maybe you can hint at it, you can take it what you want, but Lamar not going to the wild card game when the Ravens played the Bengals, that's maybe a clear sign that maybe he just does not want to be around the team or the organization. And I feel like it's going to get to a point where he's going to have to sit out. I feel like he may sit out this season, not want to play just because if he doesn't want to be on the sideline of a game, even though he's injured, even though he doesn't want to be on the sideline for a playoff game. Why is he if he doesn't want to be on the sideline, why would he want to be why would he want to play quarterback, And I feel like that's where I feel like it's just going to grow more and more, this animosity between these two clubs, between Lamar and the Ravens, to where it gets to a point where he just does not want to be playing there anymore. And I feel like we've seen the last of Lamar Jackson in a Baltimore Ravens uniform. I don't know where he's going to go next. I feel like Atlanta would be probably the smartest move, just because of the fact that Atlanta obviously they would love Lamar. First off, people would say he's like Michael Vick 2.0. And then also the fact that I just, in terms of the other teams that were not expected, I just don't feel like I feel like the Raiders will be looking to the draft. I feel like the Commanders may stick with Sam Howell, and then the Panthers, I feel like, are going to be looking to the draft as well. And so you look at this Atlanta Falcons team, and they pretty much have, they have a decent run game. Obviously, it's probably going to be led by Algier again next year. They have a receiving core that's still going to have Drake London in his second year, and hopefully we can find the resurgence of Kyle Pitts somewhere. So I feel like Atlanta would be an interesting move for him, but it's just sad to see because Lamar has given so much. A lot of people were giving him so much hate when he was first coming in at replacing Joe Flacco because everyone saw him just strictly a running back. He couldn't throw the ball and all that stuff. And then we see him throw the ball and he can make these amazing throws. And now he's arguably a top 5 QB in the league. And now it's just a shame to say now he may not even be playing this season just because of how there's been so much frustration between him and the Baltimore Ravens organization.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously still going to be, you wonder if no team is going to want to, give him an offer. I mean, you assume at some point some teams are going to kind of give in and give an offer. Like you assume there's going to be no one that's not going to give an offer. But it's obviously been an interesting kind of start, and it's just kind of interesting how within not even 24 hours you already have a handful of teams say they're not interested. But obviously teams can change their mind, and like we said, pretty much most of those tweets, if not all of them, were according to sources and not actual names. And so that kind of, leads you to kind of be a bit confused of why they can't, name the names of the sources. But, I guess we'll have to kind of monitor the situation and see if Lamar and the Ravens can get on better terms or if he is indeed going to be playing for a new team next season. So that's the kind of the news from the last couple of days. So now we'll get into the preview for free agency that starts a week from today. But we'll see. I think next Monday and Tuesday we'll see. We'll kind of hear the teams and players are going to sign. It just won't be official until the 15th next Wednesday. So I guess we can start with quarterback, where there's not too much in terms of players to look at. It's really just Garoppolo for the most part. In terms of a potential starter, and then he's not a free agent, but then you have Rodgers, obviously, who's in a potential trade target, obviously, for the Jets right now. And then you have Garoppolo, and you kind of look around and maybe the Raiders, Commanders, there's not a huge market for someone like Garoppolo. Maybe the Jets, if they don't land Aaron Rodgers, of course. Where are you kind of looking at for Garoppolo to land potentially?
Yeah, Garoppolo's an interesting one to me. I feel like Garoppolo, he is a great pocket passer. He has that presence, and obviously he's bounced around a couple times. He was first in New England, and obviously he backed up Brady when he was there, and then he moved on his own to San Fran. He's been there ever since. Under Kyle Shanahan, but now they're under the new regime, the Trey Lance / Brock Purdy regime now. So now it's time for him to go somewhere. One place I'm interested for him, honestly, they need a quarterback, and if they're going to keep that offense, right now it looks like they may not, but at the same time they may. If they keep that offense, I feel like it'd be a perfect replacement. I think the Bucs, honestly, that's kind of a dark horse place for me, but I feel like that'd be a great place for him if they get some offensive coordinators and maybe find a better coach than Todd Bowles, obviously, but just better play calling. And also if they're keeping that offense, obviously there was rumors that the Buccaneers are releasing Leonard Fournette, which kind of scared me because it's but at the same time maybe they go lean toward Rachaad White maybe a little more in terms of the run game, but I definitely feel as if maybe Jimmy G fitting in that system would maybe fit a lot more better. He's obviously a little younger than Brady, so that's obviously a big thing. He can, but he has the pocket presence, and I feel like that'd be a good start for him. To in a weak NFC South division where the quarterbacks are pretty sparring. Why not go to Tampa Bay? Kind of take that position. I feel like that'd be a good start for him. For Jimmy Garoppolo to kind of move on from his time in San Francisco and his time earlier in New England to kind of get a new start, replacing Tom Brady. Wow, comes full circle, huh? Yeah, replacing Tom Brady, who has retired, and then there were the rumors that he wasn't fully retired, but now he is officially done. He even tweeted about it. So, but yes, I feel like that'd be fun. To see Jimmy Garoppolo at 31 years of age play for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next season.
Yeah, it's actually a really good call in terms of possibility. Obviously, they are kind of clearing house a bit, releasing a number of players, but still, like we said, the division is still wide open in the NFC South. So even if they are getting rid of some players for cap reasons, it's still a winnable division at the end of the day. So yeah, that's definitely a possibility. Other than Garoppolo, I mean, there's a bunch of, it's mostly kind of more backup quarterbacks. Obviously, you have Carson Wentz, who just got released, obviously, but he's not going to land a starting job anywhere, at least probably not. So I guess moving on to running backs. Here I've just based off snaps from last season. You have Devin Singletary, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, Raheem Mostert, Jerick McKinnon, Jeff Wilson, Kareem Hunt, Jamal Williams, Madison. I would be shocked if Jamal Williams doesn't return to Detroit after what they did last year. I've seen Montgomery linked to the Chiefs, which would be interesting. It sounds like Montgomery is probably going to be out of Chicago, from what I've heard. Is there any Singletary maybe returning to Buffalo? Is there any of the names I named that you're kind of interested in to see where they land?
I mean, David Montgomery in Chicago would be really interesting. As someone who owns him in fantasy right now, I feel like he, definitely has put I feel like him on that Chiefs team, that Super Bowl winning team. I feel like maybe, I guess it's hard because that style of offense they play, but I feel like Pacheco has taken over that role, and I don't really like that in terms of David Montgomery's value. I feel like Pacheco has just, we saw it in the Super Bowl. He had that touchdown, and he can run the ball really well, and I feel like he's kind of taken a big step in that role. So, and with all the running backs the Chiefs have, I feel like that would just really diminish David Montgomery's role. So that is not something I'm happy about personally, but I feel like it could also go either way. I feel like if things with Isaiah Pacheco don't work out, that could clear the way for Montgomery to be like that 3-down back that the Chiefs have kind of always been looking for, and really just kind of fill out their offense after they tried with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and now he's not even getting any reps or anything like that, and it's just been Ronald bouncing back with guys like Ronald Jones and Jerick McKinnon, and now they also have obviously Pacheco, who's kind of been the star of that trio. But if they're maybe bringing in Montgomery, that could also be interesting to see in terms of what he can do to fit their system, because obviously he was the only bit of offense with Chicago ever since he got drafted. He was their sole offensive leader now, but obviously before Justin Fields started to get his run game going. So I feel like it can go either way. I feel like there's better places for him to go, but in terms of going from a pretender to a contender, I feel like that's definitely a big step for him personally. That would be a huge place for him, obviously, to be on a championship winning team. But in terms of his value, that could go either way. And honestly, I feel like it could go really, really negatively for him, for Montgomery, if he does end up in Kansas City.
Yeah, obviously Pacheco looked great last year, but we've seen it before where, later running backs kind of have they look really good one year, and then the next year they kind of disappear. I mean, I guess what was it? Was it? I guess it was Moser with the Niners who had like the really good playoffs, and then I mean, honestly, with him, there's more injuries than actual skill and all that. But I mean, Pacheco, a 7th-round pick, you know, the Chiefs don't have enough invested in him long term to where they're not going to not go after another running back, especially with how they kind of run their backfield. So obviously, fantasy wise, maybe it wouldn't be as ideal as another place, but McKinnon is a free agent, so that kind of opens up some of those snaps in that backfield. Um, and then I guess if Montgomery, assuming he does leave, then that kind of leaves you a question mark with the Bears backfield because then you have Khalil Herbert obviously there, but then you kind of assume that they're going to bring in another running back probably in the draft on a rookie deal. They kind of probably have a similar role as Montgomery. So we'll see who they land. Obviously, Fields has his big role as a runner as well, obviously. Kind of looking at some other names. I mean, Miles Sanders probably stays in Philly. You kind of think, just given the system that they have there. Singletary probably back to Buffalo. I think maybe Kareem Hunt's an interesting one because the Browns were looking at potentially trading him at the deadline last year, and a deal couldn't be found. And so I feel like he probably leaves Cleveland, so that opens up the door for Nick Chubb to maybe take on a bigger role in Cleveland, and maybe Hunt lands somewhere where he has a bigger role. I'm not Atlanta. I think even though they have Algier, I think they do look to still address the running back at some point, whether that's free agency or the draft. I mean, they still have Patterson as well, so maybe not a priority, but I still feel like they bring in someone. So that's mostly the running backs. Madison, I mean, there's not really a starting role for him, but maybe he goes somewhere where he's at least in the committee and not a backup to someone like Dalvin Cook, obviously. So there's that. So those are kind of the big running back names. Moving on to receiver, there's not a lot of receiver in this free agency class. Like the one with the most snaps from last year is Matt Collins, and so you have Matt Collins, Paris Campbell, Alan Lazard. I think I saw that Juju's probably going to return to Kansas City. Jacoby Myers, I feel like he's probably going to return to New England, but either way, just naming off some of these guys as the top receivers: DJ Shark, Marquise Goodwin, Noah Brown. That's just that's kind of the extent. Is there anyone that you're kind of looking at in this free agency class?
Look, I mean, it's no disrespect, but it's just not as big of a off-season free agency class.
You have Kenny Galladay, probably.
Oh, of course, now Kenny Galladay. Yeah, obviously he's just been released. So you have Kenny Galladay, who's now in there, but not really anyone of note. I'd say the biggest one was obviously going to be either Juju or Alan Lazard, and obviously Juju is being linked to coming back, and Lazard, I mean, I don't know, he could go anywhere. Obviously, now that Aaron Rodgers is probably leaving from what's been happening with the potential trade to the New York Jets. But other than that, I mean, I don't know, maybe Julio Jones at age whatever he is now. I think he's a free agent. Byron Pringle. It's just not a booming draft class. Not rookie. Not rookie. Oh my gosh, not a booming free agency class this year for the receivers. I feel like, maybe Robert Woods, obviously, who just got released from Tennessee, so maybe that's another sneaky one. Bobby Trees, he was really excited to be released from Tennessee, so maybe just a new start for him anywhere could be interesting.
Yeah, that's about the extent of that. I think it's going to be mostly the draft where teams who need receiver help are going to look to. So that's that, and then the tight end's a little bit more interesting. The big name is Dalton Schultz. It was kind of reported generally that if the Cowboys were only going to be able to tag one of Pollard or Schultz, and so they tagged Pollard, and so it seems like Schultz is probably going to be headed elsewhere, I think. So there's him. You have Foster Moreau, who stepped up when Waller was hurt at times for the Raiders. You have Robert Tonyan, Hayden Hurst. Mike Gesicki is another kind of big name who could be out of Miami. Who are you looking at potentially for these players' career?
Yeah, I mean, kind of like my top 5 in terms of like the tight ends are just Hayden Hurst, obviously, who is probably going to be going back to the Bengals. I've heard a lot of rumors that he may be coming back to Cincinnati. Obviously, I don't really see why he would leave. He's been a big part of their offensive surgeons, one of the best receiving cores in football. And then, Tunyon, I feel like he could definitely go anywhere. Obviously, now that Green Bay is maybe embracing the Jordan Love era. You mentioned Dalton Schultz is one of the bigger ones in terms of, tight end positions, just because, Dalton Schultz got the tag last year after they couldn't come to a decision. Then, this year is, well, do we either keep Tony Pollard or Dalton Schultz? And the Cowboys chose to tag Tony Pollard. So now Dalton Schultz, he can definitely go anywhere. I feel like there are some places out there where maybe just a tight end away from being, elite. I think Seattle would be honestly kind of interesting to see, in terms of lining up Noah Fant with a guy like Dalton Schultz. That could be interesting. But, in terms of money, I feel like since Seattle's already paid a lot for Geno, I feel like, maybe, not giving up some considerable amount of money to Dalton Schultz, because I think he's asking for a little bit more money than, than what Dalton Schultz or, a typical Dalton Schultz would expect. So, that's another name. You mentioned Mike Gesicki as well, and I feel like Miami may try to bring him back as well. I feel like they've always had a good connection. And now, yes, one of the bigger questions, I guess you can say, is Tua's health, obviously. But I feel like Tua's still going to come back next season. They're going to have the duo with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, one of the best duos in football in terms of receiving. And then obviously just how booming that offense really is. And then obviously Mike Gesicki with his unseasoned gritty. I feel like he definitely adds that, even though it's unseasoned, he adds that flavor to that team. And I feel like him going back to Miami could be really interesting. And then Austin Hooper is definitely one that, has kind of gone so many different places. And, he's been like a, pretty solid, maybe like top 15 tight end in football, but, not really anything too big a note. And I feel like maybe he can get his start somewhere else after Tennessee, just seems like a very interesting team right now. They're kind of heading in the wrong direction. Obviously, there's been rumors about maybe a Derrick Henry trade after, they already traded away AJ Brown, and they're kind of just in full rebuild after releasing Taylor Lewan and Bobby Trees. And, now they've, and Austin Hooper's a free agent, they're kind of just embracing it. I feel like they may trade Tannehill or may get rid of him some way. They're just kind of in this whole rebuild, so that could be interesting as well. But right now, I definitely say that Hayden Hurst going back to Cincinnati can definitely be a huge asset for that Bengals team. And I kind of feel like, Joe Burrow and Hayden Hurst have kind of developed a big connection in terms of their pass catch game throughout the time that Hayden Hurst has been in Cincinnati. I feel like, he's not really going anywhere.
Yeah, so those are kind of the big, offensive skill position free agents. So it's kind of it's not like a super, super weak class overall, but there's not any like huge names with the players that were tagged, obviously. Kind of some of the defensive top names, Bobby Wagner is probably one of the bigger names. And we're seeing a lot of Quandre Diggs kind of trying to recruit him on Twitter. And Wagner changed his, not profile picture, but the other picture on Twitter to the Seattle skyline, maybe hinting at that. Maybe that's just him trying to play games with everyone. And then you have the Rams released Leonard Floyd. The Bucks, they didn't release Devin White yet, but there were rumors that they might do so. So, you have kind of teams that are just trying to clear a cap, basically. and release some, kind of bigger names, defensive players, some who are, kind of older, some who are right in their prime, kind of some in the middle. What's your thoughts on kind of that group?
Yeah, I also want to throw in another big name. Obviously, he can't be released, but a name that's being thrown out and just a new team being traded to is Jalen Ramsey as well from the Rams. He's definitely been a name where a lot of teams have tried to recruit him, especially the Lions as well. I feel like they would really use him and just be a huge better, just a better team defensively. That's what they need to address in terms of their offseason with having one of the best offenses but one of the worst defenses in the National Football League. But you mentioned the Rams are looking like to almost clean house defensively. You mentioned they're releasing Leonard Floyd. They got rid of Bobby Wagner just after 1 year, and now they are pursuing a trade for Jalen Ramsey. Who knows whether or not a deal may be done or not, but there's been rumors that a deal is potentially in the works. And then the Bucs, obviously there's been no official word on Devin White, but we saw it on I think his Instagram story. I think it was yesterday or something where he was saying like thank you to Buccaneers fans, and you can take it any way you want, but a lot of people were taking that to mean that he's definitely ended his time in Tampa Bay. So there's that, and there's just so many just rumors early right now. I don't really see any big moves being made yet, but I feel like the Rams are just kind of, I guess, starting to clear house in terms of what they're doing defensively, and I feel like same for the Buccaneers. We also saw Frank Clark. It looks like the Chiefs are not gonna reach a deal with Frank Clark, and I think they already mutually parted ways. So Frank Clark's gonna his time and his time in Kansas City is done, and I know Seattle needs a pass rush, so interesting. Bud Dupree also outside linebacker from Tennessee. He got released as well. A lot of free agents. I feel like the defensive unit is a lot better this year in terms of some of the talent that's there. Jesse Bates, Javon Hargrave, Yannick Ngakoue, Brandon Graham. But he's probably going to retire though. Shaquille Griffin, obviously, who was the top corner for the Seahawks before he signed with the Jags. Now he's a free agent. Marcus Peters as well. Just a lot of top guys. I feel like Levante David is a free agent as well. And I feel like I don't know if Clowney is returning. I don't think he's returning to Cleveland. I think their time is done as well. So I feel like this season there's a lot more defensive presence, and I feel like more of the bigger contracts are going to go to the defensive side of the ball right now. Yes, there's some quarterbacks some top quarterback free agents, but in terms of talent, there are a lot more free agents that are going to be defensive. Just in terms of the talent that's there. So I definitely like if you're on defense and you're a free agent, you're going to get a big deal depending on where you go, because there's some horrible defenses in the National Football League that can definitely need some help. Seattle pass rush, Detroit. I feel like those two teams can definitely be addressed with this offseason in terms of what they do.
Yep. So there's definitely some bigger names, I feel like, defensively than offensively in terms of some big name free agents that teams could go after. So we'll see how all that plays out starting officially next Wednesday the 15th, but we'll hear Monday, Tuesday, teams have agreed to terms with players and whatnot. So I think that will do it for today's episode, unless you have anything else you wanted to talk about. So Friday will be all college basketball ahead of Sunday's Selection Sunday. We'll go over some of the conference tournaments that have gone on this week. And then, the latest bracketology with all of what we're looking at with the teams in the bubble, last four in, first four out, all that kind of stuff. So as always, thank you all for tuning in and watching and listening. And we will see you all on Friday.